There was a town where nothing ever happened, or so they told themselves. Nestled between hills and a lazy river, it had everything a quiet life required. Clean streets, tidy homes, polite neighbors, and children who still played outside. The baker remembered every birthday, the postman knew every name, and Sunday mornings were filled with hymnals and the scent of warm bread. But beneath the order, something small had begun. It came not with a bang or a scream, but with a whisper. The first whisper came on a Monday. It was about the mechanic, Mr. Ralston, a quiet man with thick hands and a slow smile. He had fixed cars for 30 years, never once overcharged, never once failed to wave at passers-by. But someone said, just quietly, just in passing, that he had written something online, something different. "Did you hear?" a voice had murmured in the queue at the market. He posted an article about the way things are going, said we're losing our freedom, said the government was overstepping. "Oh," the butcher's wife had replied, adjusting her scarf. "Well, that's disappointing. I always thought he was one of the good ones." No one shouted, no one threatened. Just that simple word, disappointing. It slipped under the skin like a cold wind. Soon after, Mr. Ralston noticed customers avoided eye contact. A few cars stopped coming in. Invitations dried up. One day he walked into the bakery, and the room grew just a little quieter. He stopped posting, but it didn't matter. The whisper had been enough. 2 weeks later, another whisper. This time about a teacher, Miss Elner. Everyone had known her since she was 16, when she had started helping out at the town library. She smiled at everyone, brought cookies to the staff room, and stayed late to help children struggling with reading. But one day, someone said they had seen her talking to a man who had since been accused, not convicted, of radical thinking. "That's not the kind of company a teacher should keep," someone had whispered over coffee. Again, no shouts, no arrests, just silence, a distance, the kind that wraps around a person like fog, slowly chilling them from the inside. Miss Elner remained polite. She smiled at the children, but her shoulders slouched more each week. She began eating alone in her car. The town's silence wasn't born of hatred. It was made of something far more dangerous, comfort. The people told themselves they were kind. They told themselves they didn't judge. But when each whisper came, they turned slightly away. Just a little. Enough not to get involved. Because getting involved meant risk. And in this town, risk was to be avoided. Risk was messy. Risk brought questions, confrontation, discomfort. Better to let things settle on their own. But things don't settle when silence feeds them. They grow. There was a boy named Jacob. He was 12, smart, quiet, the kind of kid who watched before he spoke, who noticed the things adults forgot to hide. He had seen how Mr. Ralston's garage grew emptier. He had seen how Miss Elner's laughter had vanished. And he had heard the whispers. One day he asked his mother, "Why don't people say something?" She looked up from the dishes. "Say something about what?" "About Mr. Ralston, about Miss Elner. Everyone knows they didn't do anything wrong." His mother dried her hands. She looked tired, not from work, but from something deeper. "Sometimes," she said gently, "it's safer not to speak." Jacob stared at her. "But if everyone says that, then no one says anything." She didn't reply, just touched his hair and turned back to the sink. Silence doesn't always sound like nothing. Sometimes it's the hum of conversation that avoids the truth, the polite smile that dodges questions, the "I didn't see" that really means "I didn't want to." And in that town, silence had become its own language. It spoke through the eyes that looked away, through the hands that stayed in pockets, through the doors that closed a little faster than they used to. But the thing about whispers is that they never stop at one. Because once people learn that silence is rewarded and speaking is punished, then each new whisper becomes easier. The threshold lowers. The next person needs to do even less to be marked. A shared photo, a misinterpreted joke, a comment taken out of context. Each new whisper fed the quiet fear that grew like ivy through the town, twisting around windows, crawling up walls, until even the sunlight looked a little dimmer. And in that dimness, the people still smiled, still waved, still told themselves they were good. Because no one meant harm. They had just stayed quiet. There is a lie that comforts many people. As long as I don't participate, I'm not part of the problem. It is whispered like a prayer in silent hearts, like a shield against guilt. But silence, persistent, deliberate silence, can be as sharp as a knife and just as deadly. In the town where nothing ever happened, silence was not passive, it was chosen. Not once, but repeatedly. After Miss Elna's quiet isolation, things began to change in ways that no one would openly admit. It started with the school board. They received a letter, an anonymous one filled with vague concerns about her judgment, her associations, and her potential influence on young minds. No names were signed, no evidence attached, just fear dressed up as concern. At the next board meeting, the language was polite, sterile, bureaucratic. "We are simply reviewing all educational staff," they said. "No need for alarm, just due diligence." Miss Elna wasn't fired. No, that would have been too obvious. She was transferred, quietly, to a position that didn't involve teaching students. Some said it was a promotion. Others said nothing at all. At the grocery store, one of the board members saw her by the produce aisle. Their eyes met. The member offered a weak smile. Elna smiled back, but it didn't reach her eyes. And what of Mr. Ralston? His business dwindled to a trickle. No official boycott, just people taking their cars elsewhere. "I just felt more comfortable with someone else," they'd say. Or, "It's not personal." But of course it was. He closed his shop that winter, moved away by spring. The town never spoke of it again. At church, a sermon was given about kindness. The pastor spoke warmly about turning the other cheek, about loving thy neighbor. Everyone nodded. No one asked, which neighbors? Because asking might reveal that some had already been quietly exiled. Jacob, 12 and far too observant for his age, noticed more. He saw how his friend Lewis, the only boy in class with an accent, was called foreign under the breath of parents who still smiled at his mother. He saw how Mrs. Harrow, the librarian, stopped recommending certain books, not because they were inappropriate, but because someone had once raised a quiet objection. "It's just easier not to stir things up," she told him one day in a low voice. "You understand, don't you?" Jacob nodded, but he didn't, not really. He just understood that fear made people small, even kind people, even people who once taught others to speak the truth. There was another incident that spring. A high school student named Amara wrote a poem. It was bold. It talked about injustice, about identity, about being unheard. It was published in the school newspaper, briefly. Then came a parent complaint. "She's being divisive," someone said. The newspaper was pulled. A meeting was held. The principal called her brave, but said perhaps it was not the right time. Amara stopped writing after that. She sat in the back of class, not out of shame, but out of fatigue. She had shouted once into the silence, and the silence had swallowed her. At a town gathering, a new banner was hung above the park stage. "In unity, we thrive." People applauded, speeches were made. Awards were given. Unity, they said, was what made the town great. But unity without honesty is not unity. It's control. It's sameness disguised as harmony. It's peace at the price of conscience. And that is what had taken root here. The people were not monsters. They were comfortable. That's what made them dangerous. They did not burn books. They quietly removed them from shelves. They did not imprison dissidents. They simply stopped inviting them. They did not shout. They whispered. And in those whispers, the fabric of the town twisted into something unrecognizable to those who still dared to remember what truth sounded like. Jacob asked his father one evening, "Why doesn't anyone say anything?" His father closed his eyes for a moment. "Because saying something makes you a target," he said. "But isn't that the point?" Jacob replied. "That if no one speaks, it just gets worse." His father looked at him sadly. "Yes, but most people would rather be safe than right. There's a myth that evil only grows in loud, chaotic bursts. But often it grows in quiet rooms, in comfortable homes, in the decision to say nothing again and again until the silence becomes normal. That is how good people become complicit. Not by doing wrong, but by letting wrong continue, unopposed, uninterrupted, unquestioned. In that town, things still seemed peaceful. But Jacob knew better now. He knew that beneath the smiles and small talk lived a deeper fear, one that wore the mask of unity but demanded obedience. A fear that didn't ask you to believe, only to be quiet. And so the silence remained. There is a kind of silence that feels like calm, a silence that wraps around a town like a blanket, soft and comforting, but blankets can smother too. And calm, when built on fear, is not peace, it's paralysis. The town wore normalcy like a mask. Children went to school. Stores opened on time. The flowers in front of town hall bloomed every season, maintained by Mrs. Langley and her garden club. The mayor gave speeches about progress and tradition in the same breath. But the truth, as always, lay in what was not said. Jacob started to notice what people avoided. At school, the morning announcements used to include student achievements, essays, science projects, art contests. But now only sports scores were mentioned. No one ever said why. In social studies class, when a student asked about protests happening in the cities beyond their quiet town, the teacher stiffened. "That's not part of today's lesson," he said. Another student, Marla, raised her hand. "But isn't that history too?" The teacher's smile was tight. "It's better we focus on what unites us." That phrase again, what unites us. It had become the new mantra, printed on posters, repeated in church bulletins, whispered by neighbors trying to reassure themselves. But unity that depends on silence is not unity, it's submission. And submission, when worn long enough, feels like routine. Jacob's mother, once outspoken at town meetings, no longer attended. His father began turning the news off mid-broadcast, muttering, "Too much noise." They were kind people, caring. They still baked pies for neighbors, still helped with community events. But they had learned, like everyone else, that silence was the cost of peace. There was a woman named Nora Whitman who used to run a book club at the library. Once a month, her group discussed novels that challenged ideas, sparked questions. But after a few complaints, again, always anonymous, she was asked to revise her reading list. The books became safer, the discussions quieter. When she suggested a memoir about a whistleblower, a member gently advised her to avoid political material. "It's not political," Nora said. "It's human." But the room was already shifting. Eyes darted. Someone coughed. No one agreed, but no one defended her either. The following month, the club was cancelled due to low participation. One morning, Jacob passed by the town square. A large poster had gone up on the notice board. Our strength is in our silence. A community that stands together doesn't need to shout. Jacob stared at it for a long time. No one else seemed to notice or care. That afternoon at school, he sat next to Amara, the girl who had written the poem that was pulled from the school paper. She rarely spoke now, but today she whispered, "Do you ever feel like we're sleepwalking?" Jacob blinked. "What do you mean?" "Like everything is normal on the outside, but underneath it's rotten, and nobody wants to wake up." He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "I think everyone's scared of what will happen if they open their eyes." She nodded slowly. "But we're already losing everything, bit by bit, even the words." In the weeks that followed, two more teachers left town. One had given a lecture on civil disobedience. Another had praised a historical figure who had once challenged authority. There was no official reason for their departures, just administrative changes and new opportunities elsewhere. Their names faded quickly. New teachers arrived, smiling, safe. At a neighborhood barbecue, Jacob overheard two couples chatting. "I'm glad things are so stable here," one woman said. "All that chaos in other places." "Exactly," the man replied. "We don't need protests or noise. We have order. That's what matters." They clinked glasses. Jacob looked around. The kids were laughing. The adults were smiling. The burgers sizzled. Nothing looked wrong. But he realized the town had confused quiet for goodness. It had replaced truth with comfort, and now it couldn't tell the difference. That night, Jacob wrote in his notebook, "Maybe the worst thing isn't the shouting of the wicked. Maybe it's the silence of the kind." He didn't show it to anyone. Not yet. But he kept writing. Because even a whisper, if it's true, can shake the quiet world. At first, it was never you. The things that happened always happened to others. People a little different, a little louder, a little more complicated than the rest. And it was easy to believe, if only for self-preservation, that they had brought it upon themselves. But silence has a direction, and once it begins to consume, it does not stop. It spreads, feeding on the very people who once thought themselves untouched. Jacob noticed when Mr. Actor, the math teacher, quietly stopped showing up to school. No announcement, no farewell, just a substitute who smiled too brightly and handed out worksheets instead of lessons. Jacob asked a friend where Mr. Actor had gone. "They said something about a review," she replied vaguely. "What kind of review?" "I don't know. I guess someone complained." That word again. Someone. Always unseen, always unnamed. No one asked further. No one wanted to be next. At the community center, a mural once painted by local kids, a wild, colorful image of hands of all shades reaching upward, was quietly taken down. "Inappropriate for our values," the director said. No one asked what those values were, not out loud. Some parents whispered about it after meetings, over coffee. "I thought it was a nice painting." "Yeah, but maybe it sent the wrong message." The right message, of course, was the one no one could define, but everyone knew how to obey it. It was around this time that Jacob's friend Lewis stopped coming to school altogether. His mother, a kind woman who worked at the diner, had always greeted everyone with warmth, but now she avoided eye contact. When Jacob saw her once by the pharmacy, she rushed away quickly, as though frightened just to be seen. He heard rumors that they were planning to move. Too much pressure. Didn't feel welcome. No one said what had caused the pressure, only that it was unfortunate, only that sometimes people just don't fit. Jacob sat alone in the library, flipping through old newspapers. He found an editorial from 5 years ago, written by Miss Elner, the teacher who had been reassigned. It was a letter about compassion, about listening to different voices. It ended with a line. Silence may protect us for a time, but it will never redeem us. He tore the page from the archive and folded it into his pocket. The next incident came quietly, but it shook something in Jacob. At church, the choir director, Mr. Henry, a gentle man who had served for over 20 years, was abruptly replaced. No explanation, no mention of him in the bulletin. Jacob's mother asked around. Something about the songs he chose, someone whispered. They said one of them was suggestive, too modern. But it was just an old folk hymn, she replied. The other woman gave her a warning glance. It's better not to question. You know how things are. Jacob finally asked his parents one night, "Why do we keep pretending nothing's happening?" His father sighed, "Because there's nothing we can do. But we could say something." His mother looked up from her knitting, and who would listen? Jacob stared at them both. "You're good people." They didn't respond right away. Finally, his father said quietly, "Being good isn't the same as being brave." The next day, Jacob found Amara sitting under the old oak tree behind school, sketching in a worn notebook. He sat beside her. "Do you ever feel like we're the only ones still awake?" She smiled without looking up. "Sometimes, but there are always others, even if we can't see them yet." "I don't want to be quiet anymore," Jacob said, "but I don't know what to do." Amara paused, then tore a page from her notebook. It was a drawing, a person standing on a ledge, looking over a crowd below. In the sky, a single word written in bold, uneven letters. "Speak. Start with this," she said. That evening, Jacob did something he had never done before. He made a flyer. Black text, plain words, no names. What happens when we say nothing? Who gets hurt when we stay safe? Is silence the legacy we want to leave? He didn't sign it. He just posted one at the library, another at the bulletin board outside school, one more near the park bench where the old mural used to be. The next day, they were all gone. But someone had written in pen over one of the torn edges, "Thank you." In a town that prided itself on quiet, even a whisper can be a revolution. Jacob wasn't sure what would come next. He only knew that silence no longer felt safe. It felt complicit. And he had chosen, however quietly, to no longer be part of it. The day Jacob's words were first noticed, the sky was clear. It was the kind of spring morning that made everything feel normal. Birds singing, lawns freshly mowed, coffee shops bustling. But normal had become an illusion, a curtain pulled tightly over growing cracks. That morning, Jacob arrived at school to find his locker taped shut. A single sheet of paper was stuck to the front. "We don't need your drama here." No signature, no name, just blocky letters scrawled in black marker. Amara saw it first. "They know," she said. Jacob didn't respond. He peeled the note off slowly and put it in his backpack. Inside, he felt a cold not form, not of fear, but of confirmation. His voice had been heard. By lunch, the whispers began. Two students stared a little too long. One teacher avoided eye contact entirely. In the hallway, someone bumped his shoulder deliberately, hard enough to knock the books from his arms. "Careful, hero," the boy muttered. Jacob crouched down, gathering his things, his hands shaking slightly. Amara helped him. "You okay?" He nodded, but his voice caught in his throat. That evening, he came home to find his father waiting on the porch. "Sit," his father said quietly. Jacob sat. His father held a printed copy of the flyer, the one Jacob had posted at the park. "Someone dropped this off, anonymously at my office." Jacob said nothing. His father studied him for a long moment. "Is it yours?" Jacob nodded slowly. "Yes." A long pause. Then, "You know this will make things harder." Jacob met his father's gaze. "Harder than pretending everything's fine." Another pause. Finally, his father sighed and looked away. "You get that from your mother." Word spread quickly, not in public, but in the subtle ways fear travels. Side comments, half glances, quiet reshufflings. By the end of the week, Jacob had been removed from the student council for disciplinary review. His creative writing submission to the school journal was returned with a note, not aligned with current themes. At church, a sermon warned about those who sow disunity under the illusion of conscience. No names, no direct accusations. But Jacob felt the heat of it all the same. At the grocery store, Mrs. Langley from the garden club gave him a look that lingered too long. At the diner, his usual server acted distant. One family that had always greeted him with smiles now crossed to the other side of the street when they saw him. The silence had turned hostile. And yet, something else stirred too. One day in Jacob's locker, a small folded note appeared. No name, just a few handwritten words. "You're not alone. Don't stop." He turned the note over, searching for clues. There were none. Later that week, another one appeared, taped beneath a desk in the library. "Thank you for saying what we couldn't." And a third, slipped between the pages of a textbook. "There are more of us than they think." The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was beginning to echo. Jacob felt it, not as noise but as presence, as possibility. Amara told him, "The cracks are spreading. That's how light gets in." Still, the cost was real. Amara was called to the principal's office one afternoon. When she returned, her eyes were unreadable. "They're reviewing my extracurricular status," she said. "For what?" "Nothing they can prove, just tone, influence, messaging." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I guess we're becoming dangerous." Danger, in a town like theirs, didn't come with flashing lights or angry mobs. It came with erasure. Slow removal, subtle exclusion, a quiet campaign to paint you as unstable, disloyal, inconvenient. That's how they had silenced others before, not by proving them wrong, just by making them disappear. Jacob understood now why the good people stayed quiet. It wasn't because they didn't care. It was because the system of silence was so well fed, so polite, so normalized, that speaking against it made you the villain. He remembered a quote he had once read in a banned book. "In times of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act." It didn't feel revolutionary. It felt lonely. But still, he kept speaking. He and Amara started writing letters, small ones, folded slips left in library books, tucked into lockers, passed by hand. They didn't include names, just ideas. Ideas like, "Kindness without courage is only decoration." "Your voice matters, even when it shakes." "What we accept in silence, we endorse." The notes spread. Some were torn down. Some were laughed at. Some were kept. Then came the town hall meeting. It was supposed to be routine, budget updates, park renovations, some discussion about the upcoming festival. But during the public comment section, Jacob stood up. His heart thudded in his chest. His palms were slick. The mayor looked up, half surprised, half bored. "Yes, young man." Jacob cleared his throat. "I just wanted to ask a question." A pause. "Go ahead." He unfolded a piece of paper and read. "At what point does keeping peace mean giving up our souls? When do we stop calling silence a virtue and start seeing it as fear? And how long can we pretend not to see before we become the very thing we once feared?" Murmurs rose across the room. The mayor gave a tight smile. "This is not the time or place for." "It never is," Jacob said. "That's the problem." A hush fell. He didn't expect applause, and he didn't get it. But he saw two heads nod. And one woman, near the back, Nora Whitman from the old book club, smiled. A small, sad, knowing smile. That night, someone spray-painted his family's garage door. "Traitor." His father scrubbed it silently the next morning, not angrily, just tired. Jacob helped him. They didn't speak much. But as they finished, his father said, "You remind me of your grandfather." Jacob looked up. Was he like this too? He spoke when no one else would. He lost a lot, but he never lost who he was. He paused. "Neither will you." It came slowly, and then all at once. For months, the town had simmered under the weight of quiet repression, where every expression of doubt was seen as disruption, and any call for empathy was labeled disloyalty. But silence, when stretched too long and too tight, eventually tears. And one morning, it did. Jacob was in English class when the first alerts came in. Phones buzzed quietly in pockets. Students glanced at each other, unsure, then started pulling them out one by one. Amara's screen was the first he saw. A headline. Local family targeted after speaking out. Video goes viral. Beneath it, a grainy image. His house, his street, his father scrubbing graffiti from their garage door. Someone had filmed them. Someone had posted it. The video had been shared, then reshared, then spun by people far beyond the town. The comments poured in like acid rain. Jacob's heart sank, not from the attention, but from what the attention meant. Now it was no longer about flyers in the library or notes in lockers. Now it was public. And public meant dangerous. By the time he got home, two reporters were parked across the street, filming. One called out, "Jacob, do you feel like a victim of censorship?" Another, "Do you believe your actions incited division?" He didn't respond. Inside, his mother was on the phone with her sister, trying to explain that they were fine. His father stood in the kitchen, his jaw tight, watching the television. The news anchor called Jacob a teen activist. The word made Jacob flinch. "I never wanted that," he whispered. "I know," his father replied. "But you told the truth. Now they'll try to rewrite you." The school didn't wait long. The next day, Jacob was called into the principal's office. "We've received concerns," the principal said, not meeting his eyes. "What kind of concerns?" "That your presence is becoming disruptive." "I haven't done anything wrong." "No one's accusing you of that. We're just thinking of the broader community." Jacob stared at him. "You mean the people who are angry that I spoke?" The principal leaned forward. "We just want to keep things peaceful." Jacob stood. Peace built on fear isn't peace. He was suspended the next day. Officially, it was for violating the code of conduct related to unsanctioned materials, but everyone knew what it was really about. By the end of the week, Jacob's mother was asked to step down from the charity board. His father's promotion at work was re-evaluated. And still, no one said a word out loud. Amara wasn't spared either. She found her artwork torn from the school gallery, replaced with bland landscapes. A teacher once friendly now referred to her as overly political. Someone keyed her bike. One afternoon, she met Jacob at the tree behind the school. I thought they'd argue, disagree, debate, she said. I didn't know they'd try to erase us. Jacob nodded. That's what silence demands, not just quiet, absence. They sat for a long time, not speaking. But even in their quiet, they refused to be erased. Then something strange happened. A teacher approached Jacob, Mr. Rowland, who taught history. He had always been reserved, polite, and quietly neutral. But that day, he placed a small book on Jacob's desk after class, a collection of speeches by civil rights leaders. He didn't say a word, just nodded and left. A week later, someone left a flower on Amara's sketchpad, a daisy pressed flat. Little things, small cracks in the silence. Then came the night. The town's youth center burned. No one was inside, thankfully, but the message was clear. On the wall, scrawled in thick red paint, "No more poison." It had been the one place still allowing Jacob and Amara's group to meet after school. The one place where their quiet resistance, reading banned books, writing truth on paper scraps, still had shelter. Now it was ash. The fire department called it an accident. But no one believed that. The town held a vigil, of course. They always did, when things got too loud to ignore. Candles, speeches, a song on acoustic guitar. Jacob stood in the back watching. He saw people he recognized, neighbors, classmates, even teachers. Some were crying, some looked bored, some looked afraid. The mayor stepped to the microphone. "This is not who we are," he said. Jacob wanted to shout, but it is. Instead, he turned and walked away. At the edge of the park, Amara was waiting. "Let's stop waiting for permission," she said. And so they did. They created a website. Anonymous at first, just stories, short testimonies from students, parents, even teachers who had been silenced, punished, excluded. Each post ended with the same line: "We are not alone, and we will not be silent." Within 2 weeks, the site had hundreds of visits. Within a month, it had thousands. And then the letters started. People from other towns, other cities, adults who had been quiet for years, reading their thoughts in the words of teenagers. Some said, "I thought I was the only one." Others said, "You reminded me of who I used to be." It didn't change everything. Jacob was still suspended. Amara still avoided certain streets. Some neighbors still crossed the road to avoid them. But the silence was broken. Not everywhere, not all at once. But enough. Enough for one teacher to speak out at a school board meeting. Enough for a parent to ask, "Why was that mural taken down?" Enough for a stranger to leave a note in Jacob's mailbox. "I see you. I'm with you." One evening, Jacob sat on the back steps of his house, watching the horizon go dark. His father joined him. "You know," his father said, "I've been thinking about something your grandfather once told me." "What?" He said, "There's a point when keeping your head down just means you're bowing." Jacob looked up at the stars. "I don't want to bow anymore." His father placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then don't." The first mural appeared overnight. Painted on the side of an abandoned building near the town's edge, it was a riot of color against grey concrete. In the center, two figures, one holding a broken microphone, the other with a mouth sewn shut. Above them, in bold red, "Silence is not safety, it's surrender." By dawn, photos of the mural had gone viral online. By noon, town officials ordered it painted over. By evening, three more murals appeared across town. The silence, once a monolith, was cracking fast. Jacob and Amara watched it unfold from the background. Their faces were still targets, their names still whispered with disapproval. But their message had become larger than them, a wildfire sparked by countless dry years. People were beginning to speak, not always loudly, not always bravely, but enough. One teacher at the high school began slipping banned books into the library's lost and found bin. A local baker taped small quotes to the bottom of pastry boxes, messages about courage, truth, and justice. A student, previously silent, read one of Jacob's flyers aloud in class and sparked a debate that couldn't be shut down. The website grew. What began as anonymous confessions had evolved into a living archive of awakening. Essays, poetry, artwork, recordings, each submission a voice rising from the hush. Some were raw with pain. I kept quiet when they expelled my brother. I told myself it wasn't my business. I still see his empty chair at dinner, and I hear my own silence ringing louder than his absence. Some were filled with regret. I laughed when they mocked her. I didn't mean to hurt her. I just didn't want them to turn on me. She dropped out a month later. I never said sorry. And some burned with a new kind of fire. I'm not afraid anymore. I won't be one of the quiet ones who watches the world rot and then pretends to mourn it. One day, during a student assembly, something extraordinary happened. As the principal gave his speech, carefully neutral, thoroughly vetted, Jacob felt a ripple through the room. It started with one student, then another, and another. They stood silently, not in protest, not in disruption, just standing. No banners, no shouting, no slogans. Just bodies refusing to sit quietly any longer. By the end of the speech, over half the students were on their feet. No one said a word. No one needed to. It made the news. The local paper, once silent on the movement, published a front-page story titled, "The Quiet Uprising." It didn't name names, but everyone knew. That same day, a teacher resigned mid-class. She told her students, "I was once proud of this job, but I've watched too many good kids punished for telling the truth. I won't be part of it anymore." The silence she left behind was different. It was not absence, but impact. But silence doesn't die quietly. With every mural, every article, every act of bravery, the opposition grew more desperate. A new town ordinance was passed. Public messaging of divisive language or images prohibited without approval. Police began removing flyers. A student who posted a quote about injustice on her locker was given detention. The school board banned unsanctioned gatherings. And yet, the gatherings didn't stop. They just moved to backyards, basements, fields outside town. One night, Jacob and Amara attended a firelit meeting beneath a starlit sky. Over 50 people showed up, many with candles, most with stories. A grandmother spoke first. "I was silent during the war," she said, her voice trembling. "Not because I agreed, because I was afraid. But I learned too late that silence is still a choice, and it can be the cruelest one." No one interrupted. No one dismissed her. In that moment, her story became part of something ancient and powerful, the long, painful tradition of conscience rediscovered. Not everyone joined them. Some still clung to comfort, to denial, to fear. Others mocked the movement, claimed it was a fad, a rebellion without meaning. But even their anger was a sign that something had changed. Because now they had to acknowledge it. They couldn't pretend anymore that nothing was happening. The silence had become impossible to ignore. Then came the real test. A young teacher, Mr. Finch, was fired for reading a banned poem aloud in class. He was beloved by students, respected by colleagues. His dismissal sent a shockwave through the school. The next morning, dozens of students arrived wearing shirts with a single word printed across the front. Listen. By noon, the administration threatened suspensions. By afternoon, over 200 people, students, parents, teachers, elders, gathered on the school lawn in silence. They didn't chant, they didn't shout. They just stood. In stillness. In truth. In defiance. Later that evening, the mayor called an emergency meeting. It was live-streamed. For the first 20 minutes, the council spoke of order and unity and protecting the town's reputation. Then a voice from the back spoke up. Amara. She walked to the podium with calm clarity. My name is Amara Lynn, she said. I'm not here to ask for permission. I'm here to remind you that fear is not a virtue. That peace without justice is just silence with better manners. The room was dead still. She continued. We've learned something important. The system doesn't just punish speaking, it rewards silence. But we're done being rewarded for looking away. She stepped down. Someone clapped. Then another. And another. Until the room echoed with applause, not loud but steady, earned, unstoppable. Later that night, Jacob wrote a new post for the website. It read, The silence didn't break on its own. It cracked because someone whispered when they were told to stay quiet. Then another and another, until the whispers became voices, and the voices became thunder, and the thunder reminded us that justice has a sound. It sounds like people refusing to disappear. He hit publish, then turned off his screen. The silence was gone, and in its place, something better. Something messy, raw, human. A community waking up. Silence is a strange thing. It feels safe while it's happening, like a blanket, like a shield. But after it's gone and the world fills with voices again, you begin to see what silence really was. A pause, a cage, a darkness where rot was allowed to grow. Now the silence in their town had broken. And in its place, new growth. A month after the school protest, Jacob sat on the front steps of his house, watching children ride past on their bikes. He could hear laughter again, real, free laughter, not the brittle kind people used when pretending everything was fine. His neighborhood looked the same, but something in the air was different. People waved more. They paused before speaking, choosing words more carefully, not to censor themselves, but to mean them. Across the street, the old Anderson couple, who once avoided eye contact with Jacob's family, brought over a tray of cookies. We saw your speech, Mr. Anderson said awkwardly. It moved us. They didn't stay long, but they didn't have to. At school, the banned books quietly returned to the library shelves. The school board claimed it was a re-evaluation of policy, but everyone knew it was something else. It was a concession, a sign that the system, so confident in silence, had finally begun to listen. Amara's mural project was officially approved by the city. She organized a group of students, artists and volunteers to repaint the town walls, not with slogans or anger, but with memory and meaning. One wall featured a forest of hands reaching upward, each leaf inscribed with a story from someone who once stayed silent. Another depicted a cracked mask, falling away from a person's face, revealing light underneath. They called the series "The Truth We Never Said." Tourists began coming to see them. Some cried while reading the words. One reporter asked Amara, "Do you think this is healing?" She answered, "No, healing is what comes after truth. This is truth." But not everything was resolved. Some wounds remained open. There were still people who called Jacob a troublemaker. Some parents transferred their kids to a neighboring school district. One teacher quietly resigned after claiming the school had become too political. But even those actions were signs of change, because they weren't ignoring anymore. They were reacting. And reaction means reckoning. One afternoon, Jacob found a letter in his locker. It was handwritten. No name, no return address. "You made me realize I was a coward. I stood by while my best friend was humiliated last year. I never said anything. I laughed. I regret it every day. I'm not ready to come forward yet, but I'm trying. Thank you for showing me how." He folded the letter and tucked it into his notebook. It didn't erase the past, but it meant something. In the following weeks, more stories began to emerge. A retired teacher shared publicly how he was forced to teach a false version of local history for decades, omitting racism, injustice, and corruption to protect community image. A nurse spoke about the silent discrimination in the hospital system, how certain patients were treated differently, how she once swallowed her discomfort because she feared losing her job. Even the mayor, once a face of denial, held a town hall and said, "We allowed fear to define us. We taught our children that truth was dangerous. And we were wrong." There was no parade, no banners declaring victory, no moment where everything suddenly felt perfect. But there was movement, and that was more powerful than any speech. Silence is a strange thing. It feels safe while it's happening, like a blanket, like a shield. But after it's gone and the world fills with voices again, you begin to see what silence really was. A pause, a cage, a darkness where rot was allowed to grow. Now the silence in their town had broken, and in its place, new growth. A month after the school protest, Jacob sat on the front steps of his house, watching children ride past on their bikes. He could hear laughter again, real, free laughter, not the brittle kind people used when pretending everything was fine. His neighborhood looked the same, but something in the air was different. People waved more. They paused before speaking, choosing words more carefully, not to censor themselves, but to mean them. Across the street, the old Anderson couple, who once avoided eye contact with Jacob's family, brought over a tray of cookies. "We saw your speech," Mr. Anderson said awkwardly. "It moved us." They didn't stay long, but they didn't have to. At school, the banned books quietly returned to the library shelves. The school board claimed it was a re-evaluation of policy, but everyone knew it was something else. It was a concession, a sign that the system, so confident in silence, had finally begun to listen. Amara's mural project was officially approved by the city. She organized a group of students, artists, and volunteers to repaint the town walls, not with slogans or anger, but with memory and meaning. One wall featured a forest of hands reaching upward, each leaf inscribed with a story from someone who once stayed silent. Another depicted a cracked mask, falling away from a person's face, revealing light underneath. They called the series "The Truth We Never Said." Tourists began coming to see them. Some cried while reading the words. One reporter asked Amara, "Do you think this is healing?" She answered, "No, healing is what comes after truth. This is truth." But not everything was resolved. Some wounds remained open. There were still people who called Jacob a troublemaker. Some parents transferred their kids to a neighboring school district. One teacher quietly resigned after claiming the school had become too political. But even those actions were signs of change, because they weren't ignoring anymore. They were reacting. And reaction means reckoning. One afternoon, Jacob found a letter in his locker. It was handwritten. No name, no return address. "You made me realize I was a coward. I stood by while my best friend was humiliated last year. I never said anything. I laughed. I regret it every day. I'm not ready to come forward yet, but I'm trying. Thank you for showing me how." He folded the letter and tucked it into his notebook. It didn't erase the past, but it meant something. In the following weeks, more stories began to emerge. A retired teacher shared publicly how he was forced to teach a false version of local history for decades, omitting racism, injustice, and corruption to protect community image. A nurse spoke about the silent discrimination in the hospital system, how certain patients were treated differently, how she once swallowed her discomfort because she feared losing her job. Even the mayor, once a face of denial, held a town hall and said, "We allowed fear to define us. We taught our children that truth was dangerous. And we were wrong." There was no parade, no banners declaring victory, no moment where everything suddenly felt perfect. But there was movement, and that was more powerful than any speech.